Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to the first event of 2022 of the Newcastle Institute. My name's Robert Logan, and it's my privilege to welcome you tonight. We have a wonderful program over the next 12 months planned, and I look forward to the opportunity to explore and with you some of the issues surrounding public policy. A special welcome to all of you who have come tonight, and also a special welcome to all of those who are watching our live stream or on our website from all over Australia and indeed the world. The Newcastle Institute was established in 2004 as an independent organisation aimed at stimulating informed, thoughtful and rational discussion on issues of public policy. The Institute does not take a position on any issue but encourage constructive engagement for the whole community in the development of new ideas that are of importance to all of us. We recognise that Newcastle has been a place of learning for thousands of years, and we pay our respects to the original custodians of this land, the Awabakal and the Warramai peoples, two elders past and present, and also we would like to thank those who continue to make Newcastle a place of discovery, a place of learning and a place of sharing ideas. Before I ask Robin Considine to introduce our special guest, Professor Julie Byles, I want to take just a moment to reflect and to thank you. Tonight is our first live event since March 2020. 2 years ago, when COVID-19 came upon us. We've had a number of events in 2020 and 2021 via Zoom, but the overwhelming feedback from people has been, can we please have live events once more? Over the last 2 years, we've learned a lot about community, about how actions speak louder than words. We've learned about sacrifice, about the importance of friends and the role that others play in our lives. COVID has exposed fault lines in our government, fault lines in our community, fault lines in our friends, and perhaps even fault lines in ourselves. It has forced us to reevaluate what is really important, what matters to us, what our place is in the world, and about what the role and responsibility of government really is. We have also seen, especially more recently during the flood crisis, wonderful community spirit, the forging of new and unexpected friendships, and a profound courage even in the absence of help from those we thought would help us. I want to thank those who have worked tirelessly to keep us safe, and those who have put their own lives on the front lines in order to help others. I want to thank all our members and supporters for your patience, understanding and loyalty over the last 2 years. It's been a very difficult time for many, and I want to thank Dr. Ross Kerridge, Robin Considine, Roger Pryor, Matt Thomas and others for their hard work behind the scenes to keep the Newcastle Institute show on the road. The need for robust, sound public policy is now more important than ever, and Newcastle Institute is proud to play a part in encouraging continuing dialogue and discussion in these areas. I mentioned earlier our program for 2022 looks fantastic. Next month, April, we have a special election discussion, not about party politics, but about the future direction of Australia and what is important. Professor Mark Kenny, former National Affairs Editor at The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, and now a Senior Fellow at the Australian National University, along with Cheryl Curnow and one or two other surprises will be among our special guests. In May, we will be exploring Australia's banking system with a special focus on the proposed merger between the Newcastle Permanent Building Society and the Greater Bank. So that should be quite interesting. We expect the CEOs or the chairs of the board of both of those organisations to be speaking about that issue. But tonight it's our honour to have Professor Julie Byles, and I'd like to ask Robin Considine to come and introduce Julie to us.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome back to those members. It's great to see familiar faces and also some new faces. I think it's fitting in the day after International Women's Day to welcome Julie here to speak on this topic about generational women's health, particularly on the results of the longitudinal study on women. Julie is the Global Innovations Chair in Responsive Transitions in Health and Ageing at the University of Newcastle. She might translate that at some stage. She's also founding investigator and director of the Australian Longitudinal Study on Women's Health, chair of the Hunter Ageing Alliance, and I saw John's here tonight as well, who's involved in the Hunter Ageing Alliance, head of the International Longevity Study, and co-president of the International Longevity Centre and Global Alliance. Now, as well as medicine, Julie has a strong background in public health, epidemiology, which we're all much more familiar with, and certainly thankful for all the epidemiologists who have guided our response to the pandemic. Their guidance always hasn't been taken note of, but we thank those people with that specialty in epidemiology, and Julie is one of those people. I had the privilege of working with Julie in the 90s, I think from the 90s, and was there on the day that they announced that the announcement about the longitudinal study was made, and there was much excitement about what that could bring in terms of understanding women's health at a population level and the importance of that for policy. So it's my privilege to welcome Julie and see Julie. I haven't seen Julie for quite a few years, but I think you're going to really enjoy the presentation tonight. So please join me in welcoming Julie.
Turn this up. Now, can everybody hear me right up the back? Yes? Good? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Robin. Yes, it's great to be here, great to see you. And I'm really thrilled to be the first speaker coming back after COVID. Yeah, that's fantastic, yes. We started the longitudinal study, it feels like we started it in 1994 because that's when we started writing the grant application, and then we finished it. I did a bit of work on it when I just delivered my only child. I was still in the hospital bed having delivered her, still finishing the application. And then we got started in 1995 and recruited women in 1996. And I run into people sometimes who say to me, haven't you finished that study yet? So I'm really pleased to say that no, we haven't. And what I'll talk to you about today is a little bit about how far the study's come, but particularly as we've followed women. We've had about 58,000 women in the study to date, and we've been following those women over time. And so we learn a bit what happens to women, what the changes that happen in their health and their circumstances as they age, but because we've got multiple generations, we can also look and see whether things are the same or different for future generations, and I think that's really important information. Yes, and on being an epidemiologist, I was sitting around having a drink with a few people in my neighbourhood a few weeks ago, and they were all talking about COVID, and one was saying, I'm not an epidemiologist, and the other one said, neither am I, and another one said, neither am I, and I said, I am. And they said, no, you're not. What have I been doing all my life? But yeah, okay. So yes, it feels like everybody's an epidemiologist now, unless people know what it is and don't think that there was someone who looked after skin diseases. So I promise it's not going to be death by PowerPoint. I just put a few pictures up because sometimes it's nice to have something to look at. And sometimes a picture tells 1,000 words, so occasionally I need one. But I have a bit of a rule, like limit the number of graphs after 6 o'clock because nobody wants to then we can have time for questions. So I'll just check my watch now and make sure I leave time for interaction, because that's the most important part. So yes, 8th of March is always International Women's Day. That was yesterday here, and actually in the rest of the world it's still or only just finished being International Women's Day, so we're very, very timely. And the International Women's Day is a chance to champion the cause of women around the world. So sometimes it's to celebrate women's roles, and sometimes it's to highlight some of the issues that women still face. So we want to take action against gender bias and inequality, and that was a theme this year. But also to recognise women's important roles in building a better future for everybody. It's also, we're also into the United Nations Decade of Healthy Ageing, and you might not have heard about that. Who's heard about the UN Decade of Healthy Ageing? Okay, not too many people. I think it's, I guess because COVID has taken all the limelight, the decade hasn't been able to have much airing. But we do have a campaign at the moment to try to sign a whole lot of organisations up to a network which will get to inform the activities of the decade. So I'll really encourage Newcastle Institute to sign up to that and to register with the activities and be able to join workshops and discussions and that sort of thing. So I'll send you that information. So the decade is a global program to improve the lives of older people, their families and their community, and really trying to get the member states of the UN to really focus on what are the needs of older people. Tonight I'm going to reflect on changes in women's health as they age and the changes in women's health over successive generations, and see if we can ponder how far women's health has come and how far we might have to go. And particularly, what will the lives of current generations of younger women look like when they are older? And also, what can we do to promote a better world for our older selves? No matter how young or old we might be at the moment, what do we want it to look like in 10, 15, 20 years' time? Okay. Alright, so just going to start the presentation focusing on the oldest women in our study. They were born in 1921-26, and they're the oldest of them is turning 100. Starting last year and going through over the next 5 years. And on up there you can see a birthday card that I drew for the women. So that's been going out, get a letter from the Queen, I suppose, and a birthday card from me. And we actually interviewed some of the women who were in their late 90s. And one of the first questions we asked them in those interviews is, how does it feel to be in your 90s? So, and you know, I'll just give a quote from one. She said, well, for 93, I think I'm doing very well. I enjoy good health. I'm involved in a lot of activities, so I'm out and about most days. I just enjoy life. I have a nice positive attitude about life and things because I think there is so much you can enjoy in life. She says at times it feels very lousy, and at other times it's just, you just take it for granted. Well, when people ask me, how are you? I say, I'm fantastic, because I don't feel that anybody really wants to know how I am. So I find that with saying I'm fantastic, that I bring a laugh and a smile, and on we go. So, you know, you might recognise that sentiment about being positive about things. And, you know, that's one of the things that really captured me when I started working with this group of women back when they were 70, was the real positive attitude they had to life. A little go-getter attitude, and I just wanted a bit of that. So I'm still getting that from the women right through to being 100 and 100 plus now. And in the interviews, many women expressed amazement at their own age. They didn't feel any different to their younger selves, even if, as they said, the external parts didn't work as well. So just going to take you back in a bit of a time machine, because remembering that these women were born in 1921 to 26. So in 1921, the world was just recovering from a global pandemic that had killed tens of millions of people. Russia had invaded Georgia. Dr. Marie Stopes opened the first birth control clinic in London, and Chanel No. 5 perfume was invented by Coco Chanel. Some significant events happened. These women, they grew up through the Depression, the rise of fascism, World War II, the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and many of them had children during the post-war baby boom. I first met the women in 1996 when they were in their early 70s, and at that time I was a young mum, I was in my 30s. I just finished my PhD, which was in cervical cancer screening. I thought I was going to continue my research interests in women's health, so I joined part of the team who were bidding to run the Australian Longitudinal Study on women's health, and I really thought that I would be interested in women having babies, maybe the operations that women have, maybe some ovarian cancer, breast cancer. I thought I'd be really interested in those aspects, perhaps as women move through their 30s and 40s and maybe get to menopause. And I hadn't thought much beyond that. But as you'll see, I became captured by this oldest group of women. And so I've spent the last 25, 26, 27 years of my life just being so excited by them. Just a little bit more about the study. The study and its origins. The study emerged from the 1989 National Women's Health Policy. So this is actually a historical artefact of that National Women's Health Policy, although it is available online, which is good. And that policy recognised the need for timely, accurate research data to inform health policy and practice relating to women's health. The policy was based on a clear recognition of the position of women in society, the way this affects their health status and their access to health services appropriate to their needs. The policy also fulfilled international obligations at the end of the United Nations Decade for Women. So now we're in the decade for ageing, but that was the decade for women. The key issues of concern were reproductive health and sexuality, the health of ageing women, emotional and mental health, violence against women, occupational health and safety, the health needs of women as carers, the health effects of sex role stereotyping on women. The policy placed health within a social context that went beyond a traditional medical model of healthcare, which focused on maybe anatomy, physiology, disease and treatment. The policy recognised that health was more than the absence of disease, but a complete state of mental and physical well-being, and that many of the causes and solutions to women's health problems lay in their social circumstances and context, rather than in a pill or an operation. So, in 1996, I skipped a bit because we had to apply for this and compete with other people, and it was about a 2-year process of applying to get the funding. And so it was very exciting when we were the successful applicants. It was very exciting indeed. So I just made it like, oh, we just did it. But it was incredibly amount of hard work and lobbying and thinking and writing and all sorts of things. But in 1996, we were in a position to recruit around 45,000 women from all over Australia who were born in 3 birth cohorts. So the 1921-26 cohort, the 1946-51 cohort, and the 1973-78 cohort. So we've already met the women in the oldest cohort. We've been able to follow those women in their 70s when most of them were living active and productive lives with few conditions and little in the way of disability. And as I said, they captured my imagination and piqued my interest in ageing well. The next cohort that you can see there were born in 1946-51. They were aged in their late 40s when we began the study. They lived through the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Cuban Missile Crisis. The birth control pill became available in 1960 when those women were entering their teens. Our study caught up with them when most of them had finished having children. I think pretty well all of them. I think we had one woman might have had a very late baby, but they finished having children, but they were still mostly premenopausal. Now the next cohort there were born in 1973 to 78. They were born around the time of the launch of the first space shuttle. They lived through Chernobyl, the attack on the Twin Towers, and wars in the Middle East. And Roe versus Wade was a landmark case in women's health rights. We first met these women when they were in their 20s, when many of the women were studying, but already some of them were married with children, and more than we thought, because we'd actually oversampled women living in rural areas, and we found they had married and had babies, or not married, and had babies earlier. And so it is a special feature of the study that we deliberately oversampled women in rural and remote areas so that we could have something to say about those women, not just people living along the eastern 40s. The women in their 40s are now in their 70s, and the women in their 70s are now in their late 90s, and some have turned 100. These generations in the women, these three generations of women have provided a wealth of data on their lives, their social circumstances, and their health and their healthcare, allowing us to study changes in women's health over time and covering women's lives from 18 to 100 plus. Now, over the course of the study, a whole generation of women were born and grew up. So we were able to recruit those women into the study in 2012, 2013. So that gives us a fourth cohort, which tell us something about the lives of young women today. Okay. So now, because the women in their 70s, started in their 70s, have been my special interest, and I'll tell you a lot more about them. So the women who started the study in their 70s provide strong lessons on healthy ageing and pointing to the importance of physical and social activity and healthy behaviours, but also the importance of educational and social advantage. Obviously, over time, these women have showed some decline in their physical functional capacity. They've developed disease and disability, and by now many of them have died. Over their lives, we were able to gain information not only from their surveys, which they returned with great regularity, but also to linking to administrative data on their health and aged care use. So it's a tremendous minefield, a gold mine, I should say, not minefield. Might be a minefield when you're trying to analyse it. It's a gold mine of information. Now, when they started in their 70s, around 1 out of every 10 had diabetes. Around 1 in 10 had asthma. 2 out of 10 had heart disease. 4 out of 10 had arthritis, and 5 out of 10 had hypertension. By the time the women reached their late 80s, the proportions in each cohort with each condition had nearly doubled among the surviving women. And also, we were able to identify that around 29% of the women would have had some form of dementia. And we did that by looking not at their survey data, because it's a bit unreliable for people to say, I've got dementia. Usually they might drop out of the survey. But because we were able to link to their health and hospital data, and their aged care data, we were able to get indicators of whether or not they might have developed dementia. So that makes the study a really profound resource for understanding dementia as well. Now, so obviously over time, the women developed more conditions, but they didn't just have one condition, but many conditions all at once, because you don't just get one condition, you get as many conditions as you get. And the number of comorbid conditions, and I know I don't have to explain that word comorbid now, because again, of COVID, we know all about it. But the numbers of comorbid conditions increased as the women aged from 1 or 2 conditions when they were in their 70s to more than 3 conditions when they were in their 80s. I think I might just move to this picture, because this picture shows a bit of a progression over time in terms of whether women have no major disease or disability, whether they have disease but no disability, whether they have disease and they've developed a bit of disability to go along with that. So at 70 to 75, 36% of the women had no major disease or disability. Now, in some of the ageing gerontology literature, that's called successful ageing. And I don't actually like that term, because I think you can have some disease, you can have some disability, and you can still have aged successfully. I think you can die and still have aged successfully. So I'm a little bit careful about the term successful ageing, because what's the alternative to that? Well, they don't call it unsuccessful ageing, luckily. They call it usual ageing. But I did have a look at this using the successful ageing term to see how many of our women might be able to fit into that category. And obviously when they're younger, around about 36%, and that's about on par with the international literature. But obviously as they get older, it's fewer and fewer. So the other thing that I think is really important from looking at the way that the women, their health changes over time, is what I call this wide window of opportunity. So see those pink women in the middle, the paler pink women in the middle, I call that the wide window of opportunity, because this is the time when women have a chronic disease but they don't have any disability. So if their chronic disease is asthma or diabetes, I think there's a really wide, or hypertension or heart disease, I think there's a really wide window of opportunity there where we can manage that condition well. So often we think of prevention about don't get a disease, and then if you do, you're no longer successful. But I think the success is still in managing those conditions as well as you can. You want to mitigate, you want to reduce the progression of the illness and mitigate any adverse effects, and maximise your quality of life. And then when we move 20 years into the future, when the women in their 90s, only 9% have no conditions or disability, and most of those with disease also have disability and need for help, and I'm still going to call those women successful. Those who lived, now I did say I wouldn't have too many graphs, but this is just a little bit of a graph of what we did. We did some analysis to just try to break the big group of women up into different groups according to what their aging trajectory might be. So what we did is we identified 6 main groups. There were those who died early by the age of 85, those who lived longer but with disease and disability, those who lived very long with disease and disability, those who stopped returning surveys, but because we already had some information on them, we were able to look that in all other ways they were like the people who lived long with disease and disability, or the usual ages. Those who lived with disease but did not develop a disability, so they're women with a wide window of opportunity, and those who reached their 90s with no major disease, disability or need for help, and so that's the traditional successful ages. We also had a look at just could we work out the amount of years you might be expected to live on average in different states. So at age 70 to 75, we were able to predict that life without disease and disability was 8 years. So from 75, on average, women had 8 years without any disease, major disease or disability. Life with disease but no disability was 4 years. So that's that window. I'd like to make it wider, on that edge, not this edge. And life with disability was 4 years. We're seeing these multiple trajectories in older age, with some people maintaining very high levels of functional capacity, and some experiencing decline in their capacity and requiring additional external supports. And one of the things that we find is that the older you get, the more different you get from other people. So, age is not the great leveler, age is the great difference. Some of the factors associated with higher levels of functioning throughout adult life included education. So those with a higher education were 62% less likely to have poor physical function in their later life. Exercise. Those who did the most exercise were 96% less likely to have poor physical functioning. BMI, smoking, and having any of diseases, arthritis, stroke, osteoporosis, heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, bronchitis or emphysema or asthma. And if you had more than one disease, you were even more likely to have poor physical functioning. So let's turn now to the concept of healthy ageing. So in 2015, the World Health Organization developed a concept of healthy ageing that was defined as the process of developing and maintaining the functional ability that enables people to continue to do the things they choose to do and value. So nothing about disease, nothing about disability, but being able to do the things you choose to do and value. This ability is a balance between the person's intrinsic capacities, so the physical and mental capacities of the individual, how strong you are, that sort of thing, and their supportive environment, so your home, your family, your community, the services, the general ecosystem and broader society. These can all be designed to support older people if their intrinsic capacities are starting to decline. So the goal of healthy ageing is to build and maintain for as long as possible people's intrinsic capacities, that's great, and to compensate and support when these begin to decline. So it's a balance. The concept of healthy ageing recognises that people enter their older age already on different paths with different levels of capacity, different threats to their health, and different levels of intrinsic reserve. Social position and personal resources across the life course also affect how people are able to adapt to change and to be supported in their old age. Now, you said I was going to unpack my title, which is Responsive Transitions in Health and Ageing. Now, I gave myself that title. I had about 5 minutes to think about it, but I gave myself that title because that's what I think is really important. Not that we don't change as we get older, of course we're going to change, but we're able to respond to those changes in an adaptive and positive way, whether that means us as individuals or whether that means societies. So the goals for care and support also change according to where people are along the healthy ageing pathway. At earlier ages, when people have higher levels of ability, their needs are for supportive environments that enable their participation in family and community life, encourage prevention of disease and functional decline. All of these things remain important as people age and their intrinsic capacities decline, but further needs for support in daily activities to reverse losses and to regain abilities begin to have greater priority. You know, you can regain abilities. In later life, people need more and more help to compensate for loss of capacity and diminished ability to perform activities of daily living. At the last stages of life, the emphasis of care and support may be to provide for the basics of personal care and to ensure quality of life and dignity. Now, in our study, we looked at aged care. Now, most aged care is provided by older people for older people. So we hear a lot about the aged care system, but the biggest part of the aged care system is us. So we found that women were generally twice as likely to care for someone else than to need care themselves. So we're always talking about older people needing care. We hardly ever talk about them providing care. We also found that around 40% of women had very low aged care needs with limited use of home care, and these women had the best, and also these women of course had the best physical and mental health and social functioning. Around 25% of the women consistently used home care from about age 75 onwards, with increased use of residential aged care in their late 80s and early 90s. Another 10% had very high use of residential aged care from 75 years onwards, and around 25% of them died, usually before their mid-80s, having very high use of home care and residential aged care in the years just immediately preceding their death. And these women had the very worst scores of physical function, social function, and they had more chronic conditions. We also found that home care use can delay admission to residential aged care, with earlier use of more home services reducing the cumulative rate of admission to residential aged care. So what I say is that help helps, earlier help helps earlier, and more help helps more. So I really encourage people to go out and seek help, to anticipate what your needs are, to seek help and get it organised. Compared to those who had few basic home care services, those who used more complex services had lower rates of admission to residential aged care. Up to a point. After quite a few years, it actually ended up that people eventually needed residential aged care, and the home care just didn't make that much difference. And so we think residential aged care may still be required in later life after a long period of supported home care. So again, we had a look at this time in state. So from about the mid-70s, we forecasted on average women live around 8 years without using aged care services, 5 years using home care, and around 2.5 years in residential aged care. And they may not be the optimal numbers. Maybe we need to have more years using home care. We also had a look retrospectively at the use of home care for women who'd been admitted to residential aged care and in accordance to what their care needs trajectories appeared to be. And what we found there is plenty of room for increasing in-home services prior to the admission of residential aged care. We actually believe that if the women had received more services earlier, then their residential aged care would have either been delayed or prevented. So we think there's a lot of opportunity to improve the timing of home care and the amount and type of care that people receive. Okay. Now I'm just going to stay on this slide. I'll move to that one in a moment. But I'm going to move now from the older women to the women who were in their 40s when we started, so who were born in that post-war baby boom. So those women are a completely different cohort to the ones born in 1921, 26, because they've actually had many health and social advantages. So much better education, actually better nutrition, and so a lot of advantages. So let's look at how, and now those women are in their 70s. So we think they might have better opportunities for ageing well. So they're now in their early 70s, and compared to the ones that came before, that 1946-51 cohort generally have better scores across most of our quality of life domains compared to the older generation when they were at the same age. So that's really, really good news. So things like their general health, their levels of vitality, their physical functioning, their ability to carry out their roles, and also their emotional well-being. They're less likely to smoke than the previous generation, but they are heavier. The women in the, and I should say, I could talk a lot more about weight, particularly weight in older ages, because it's not a simple message. It's a different message for what we have the message for younger adults, but I'll park that. The women in the 1946-51 cohort had better self-reported general health, a lot fewer symptoms than the previous cohort. They suffered less from poor memory and eyesight problems and had fewer breathing difficulties. They did have more stiff or painful joints and more arthritis, more diabetes, and a higher prevalence of leaking urine. The women in the 1946 cohort had fewer GP visits than the previous generation, but they had more hospital and specialist doctor visits. So that might say something about our healthcare system and how that's changed in the last 25 years. So we think that overall, that new cohort, the 1946-51 cohort, who are 70 now, have good prospects for healthy ageing, except maybe for an increase in the prevalence of obesity. They have better education, lower rates of smoking, they tend to be more physically active. And we think that will all stand the women well as they age, increasing both their total life expectancy and their disability-free life expectancy. And this is a little bit of a detailed graph, so maybe you don't even need to look at it too much, but it actually shows a lot of good news, because what we did is we looked at the projected life expectancies and healthy life expectancies for those women. And we looked at being a smoker, obese, and not doing exercise. So if you had all of those things, you're a smoker, obese, and you didn't do any exercise, your total life expectancy was decreased by about 9 years, and your disability-free life expectancy was decreased by 9.7 years. So we can see how those risk factors are making a difference. And it was very different for women with higher and lower levels of education. So I just, you can save that graph for later on, or ask me and I'll send it, that picture for later on, but ask me and I'll send it to you. It's just like, it's 7:45. Don't need those numbers. But then comes COVID, okay? So we're going on good, and then came COVID. So what happened to these women during COVID? Well, from April to November in 2020, I was going to say last year, but I've lost a year, 2020, we surveyed the women every 2 weeks to gain insights into the effects of COVID-19 pandemic and the public health response on the women's health and wellbeing and circumstances. And what we found was that the COVID pause came at an interesting time in these women's lives. For many of them, it allowed them to take stock and work out what they enjoyed and valued. But others felt a lot of stress and loneliness and isolation from their families, worry and concern and disruption of their ability to provide care. And in terms of health behaviours, the women who were in their 70s were more likely to drink less rather than drink more alcohol, which was a surprise that I can't relate to. Some improved their physical activity and diet, but we found they were more likely to gain weight than to lose it. They tended to exercise less than usual and to sit more. And also, while there was a strong focus on cooking and healthy food, they were also more likely to eat more food overall, including more cakes and snacks and more takeaways. So the health effects of the COVID-19 pandemic are going to take some time to be borne out. Now this is even if you didn't catch COVID, time to be borne out. And I think the women are going to need to play catch up in terms of exercise and healthy eating, screening and management of chronic disease, because things got put on hold and delayed. And when we come out of COVID, we need to ramp up our efforts to help people regain or retain healthy habits, to continue to value the things that bring life meaning, and to treasure the community connections and kindness that we did develop by all being in the same storm. Right. Now, I'm going to segue a little bit now and talk about the importance of education as an asset for women's health. So we find that education is a really important determinant of women's health and wellbeing across their lifespan. So in a different study, we actually asked people how many books they had in their home when they were a child. And you might like to think back to how many books you had in your home when you were a child. Was it enough, none or very few, enough to fill one shelf, one bookcase, two bookcases, three or more bookcases? Did you have a whole library? So this is a really interesting socioeconomic indicator. And in this study, we looked at people who were 60 to 65 years of age, men and women actually in this one. We looked back to how many books. And what we found is that the books were related to childhood circumstances, including their parents' socioeconomic status, their schooling at age 16, and their childhood ill health. In turn, staying in school was related to their highest educational achievement, their occupational status, their income, and their adult health, and their childhood health was associated with their adult health, and their adult health was the main effect on quality of life and satisfaction at age 65. So that, so we talk about education being really important. And I'm just going to skip over a little bit because when we look, I'm just missing a bit because I'm thinking we're running out of time, we need time to chat. So education is really important for women's health. And what we know is as we go down our cohorts and get to our younger and younger women, they're being more and more educated. So the youngest women in our study have actually increased their education as they go through their 20s. No surprise, they're going through university and getting further education or TAFE or whatever. But also, the 1973 to 78 cohort continued to increase their education right through to their 40s. And the women in the 1946 to 51 cohort also increased their education through midlife and with associated improvements in their health. So this is a message for lifelong learning. So just finally, I'm just going to look quickly now at the next generations of the 1973 to 78 and 1989 to 95 cohorts and think about what their prospects for health might be in midlife. So for generations to come, the advantages of education may be overwritten by other social pressures because most of them are educated. So when we had the oldest cohort, was big difference, mid-cohort, big difference between the educated and the not educated. But now most people are educated, that's been a great social achievement. But we think that maybe those advantages may be overwritten by other social pressures that maybe have already translated into greater stress and more health risks for those women. So a little bit of good news to start with. The good news for these very young women is that the prevalence of cigarette smoking among women in Australia of all ages has declined steadily, and each cohort has lower and lower rates of smoking to start with and more quitting over time. So this is actually a real public health win. It's the cumulative effect of multiple anti-smoking measures, which we'd all know about. However, one of the major increasing risks is obesity. And so at age 40 to 45, around 57% of the 1973-78 cohort were overweight or obese compared with 45% among the previous cohort when they were the same age. This trend continues. The 1973-78 cohort are more likely to experience weight-related conditions such as type 2 diabetes and heart disease in their later years. And we're already seeing evidence of increased diabetes among the women in the 1973-78 cohort, particularly for those who have been remaining heavier for longer. And we find that the 1989-95 cohort are even heavier at younger ages. The women in the 1989-95 cohort who is in their 20s are also reporting worse self-rated health and more signs of psychological distress. What this graph is their mental health. So the higher on this graph, the better you are, better your mental health is. And you can see that red line there for the youngest group of women who are right down below all of the other women. And the COVID pandemic is likely to have exacerbated these health issues for many women, with women in the younger cohorts experiencing more stress and distress and having more negative impacts on their health behaviours compared to the women in their 70s. I think cumulatively these factors set off some alarms for the future of these women as they age, including their ability to continue working, the onset of diseases such as diabetes and arthritis and effects on quality of life, disability and their need for health care. The opportunity to improve the health of these women in their mid and later years starts now. So this brings us back to the idea of healthy ageing. It doesn't start when you're old, and it doesn't stop when you're old, and it's the journey of a lifetime. So I'm going to leave you with some words of wisdom from one of the oldest women in the study. And she says, always look on the bright side of life. She says, I have a favourite song that when I get up in the morning, it's usually the first thing I say. It's Monty Python's Always Look on the Bright Side of Life. Da-da, 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 da-da. So I do a little dance with the da-da, 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 da-da bit, and that's my best advice to anybody. Just always look on the bright side of life, because it's not that long. You think it is, you know, oh, I've got to wait 6 months before we can go on holidays, you know, but that 6 months is like 6 minutes when you're 90. It goes so fast, you can't believe how fast it goes. I don't know how I ever got to be this age. Thank you. And if you want to ask questions, the bit I skipped over was the bit about women and work. So another time, maybe I'll come back and talk about that.
Okay, so I think we've got some mics around. Ross has got one over there. And we'll try and bring them up to people if people feel comfortable doing that. Yep. Any questions to start?
Hello, I'm not sure if I heard correctly, but did you imply that women who get help earlier live longer?
That, not that they live longer, although they may well, but that they stay out of residential aged care, stay out of the nursing home longer.
Right, because that's my theory.
Yes, good. I've got the data to back it up.
What annoys me, and I've heard from various people, there's aged care packages, but a lot of people don't know they exist. A lot of women, well, both men and women can have them. They don't know that they can apply for them. And out of that aged care package, we get our gardens done, we get special chairs if we need chairs and things, and it's great. Now there's two things that are hampering it at the moment, and that is that there's the old generation, I don't want anybody coming into my house. And the other problem is that those of who are reasonably educated have to pay a co-payment. And they say, oh, but that co-payment, I can get my daughter to do the housework and stuff. My daughter,
Is it me? Oh, it's me.
Sorry.
Oh, okay.
my attitude was that the co-payment was equivalent to the normal housekeeping work that the other system, there are two systems, and I've been very pleased to have that aged care package, even though I pay a co-payment. So
Yes, thank you for that. I think that's John's up the back there, and John and I are on a bit of a mission to try to increase people's ability to get information on what sort of services are available and how to make them work for you. So that's one thing. So yes, people don't know that packages are available, or they think they're only for very frail older people, but in fact, like we said, the earlier you get, so get a bit of transport so you can get out, get some other services so that, you know, improve your nutrition and all sorts of things, and keep doing the things you choose to do and have reason to value, and that should be what it's about. So we are trying to, through the Hunter Ageing Alliance, we are going to be trying to see what we can either optimise if it already exists and leverage, or invent if we need to invent it, to try to increase people's access to the knowledge about what's out there, but also the knowledge about how to use it, because you're quite right, a lot of people, it's not that it isn't there, it's that people are resistant to it and about using it for its best purpose. And the other thing I think we need to do with those services is to not just be about doing things for people. You can't do your housework, someone will do it for you. But it should be about doing things with people, and it shouldn't be about doing the things people can't do. It should be helping people to do the things they want to do or need to do. So it should be much more about enabling and much less about replacing. So that's one thing. The other thing is we talk about the packages. But if you wait, you get the aged care assessment, you get approved for the package, and then you can wait 9 months. It's about average 9 months to get the package. So in that time, a lot of things can go south. So I would really encourage people to get onto still the same aged care providers, but get some services through the CHSP, which means it's subsidised, and financially it's not much different to being on a package. And then you get used to your services, you get used to your service providers and that sort of thing. And the third thing that I think we need to do with services is, yes, let's be a little bit more existential about it and not just so practical. Let's have a little bit more focus on people's quality of life and relationships and meanings and that sort of thing. So that's a project for next year, but yeah.
Talking about the quality of life, what does your study reveal about our sexuality?
Yeah, so we did ask women about their sexuality. One of the issues that they commented on was got censored, not having a partner. So this was the oldest women in the study, so not having a partner was an issue. So some of them were obviously able to manage themselves. Which is obviously very important. But for them, I think for a lot of them felt quite sad about not having a partner. Yeah. And what's interesting, we actually did that study with men and women, and what was interesting is the men, they're the same age, they were in their sort of 80s, and the men were having sex all the time, and the women weren't because they didn't have anyone to have sex with. So we're really interested in who the men were having sex with. So, yeah. And also, it's Joanne, isn't it? Yeah. Also, we not in that cohort, but in the other cohort, we do have a lot of information about same-sex relationships and that sort of thing as well. So we've been able to provide a lot of information on lesbian, health, bisexual. And in the youngest cohort, we don't have enough categories for all of their different sexual
I've got a comment on another subject.
Yeah.
Talking about the services, and I've stopped my the cleaner or the person that comes in to help do some household stuff because they're not able to do the job. And by that, what I mean is they're not allowed to. They can't reach up, they can't bend down. And at this time of the pandemic, when people talk about deep cleaning, what do old people do to get a deep clean in their house? I haven't found it possible to do it. On the other hand, I have just finished the short-term restorative program that goes for 8 weeks, and that is fantastic.
Yeah.
Absolutely marvellous.
Absolutely great.
There's a lot of flaws in it, but overall it's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, it is great, and so as people don't know, and you just get really intensive. It's $12,000 package. The provider might take some of it for administration, but you still get a big budget. You can get physios, speech pathology, dietitians, occupational therapy. What did you get? Massage. Whoa, I'm getting one. Yeah.
I asked for a gigolo.
Yep.
I asked for a gigolo.
Yeah.
She said, we have to have an outcome. I can give you that.
Yeah. My mum's on it and she's getting a new mattress. She's getting a new mattress because, yeah, so. Yeah.
I get all that in my age care package.
Yes.
I've had a new mattress.
Yeah. Oh yes, you can get the same thing through your aged care package, but this package is really intense, and it's exactly what I said. Is that it's really focused on reablement. It's really focused on getting you up and going again. So your aged care package might be more for steady state, but this is a whole lot of intensive physio, so that you're not using the walker anymore and you're running around the park. So yeah.
But the other thing is, the deep cleaning group that I'm with, we have somebody who comes in and cleans your windows, somebody who climbs the ladder. We get those in less
Especially.
often, but they come. And one particular group that I work with, they started off as just a husband and wife. Now he employs his son-in-law, his daughter-in-law, his daughter, and everyone else. It's become big business for them. So,
Yeah.
sorry.
That's all right. You're the expert.
There's a question down here, Ross. Julie, I've just got a quick question.
Yeah.
You talked about the role of education. swim or dancing or just going to play bridge or any engagement?
So two answers to that. One is in our analysis it was formal education, but all of that other interaction and learning is important, and it is part of that doing the things that you choose to do and have reason to value, and it's part of that concept of healthy aging being about growth. So we hardly ever talk about older people growing. We sort of always talk about this rhetoric of decline, but you can grow, and that's what people should be striving for as well. Yeah.
Julie, I just wanted to ask a question about the study in relation to family violence. I noted that in the policy in the late 80s,
Yeah.
it was mentioned, and it's been mentioned in subsequent policies, both women's health and a lot of other things. And yet my understanding of the data indicates that domestic violence or family violence has increased,
Yeah.
not decreased, whether that's through additional reporting or not. Did your study show anything about that?
Yeah, so yes, we've been looking into that quite specifically, and my colleague Deb Goldstein's the expert in that area nationally and internationally. And sad to say, yes, the violence, obviously the older you get, the probability that you experience some violence, interpersonal violence within your intimate relationships increases. But I don't like to call it domestic violence, it makes it sound too nice. But as we go down the generations, it's increased quite dramatically. And we've just got a report we submitted to the government, and we think there's twofold factors happening there. One is the increased reporting and the increased ability to recognise forms of violence which you might not think of violence previously. With married at first sight, now everybody knows what gaslighting is. I don't think they knew what it was before, but now everybody knows what gaslighting is. Things like that, coercion. At what they said, and they hardly ever say, I'm being abused. But they do say things about, I'm afraid, or, they're very loud, or very forceful, or they use different language. And so she's going through and identifying like a lexicon of words that people use to describe abuse, and that's going to it's already attracting a lot of interest because it's going to have huge policy implications, because you don't look for abuse, you look for these other things. And in fact, by the time you get abuse, it's really basically too late, because now criminal offence, and it's catastrophic. Yeah.
Hi Julie, I just wanted to quickly see if you could expand a little bit on women in your study that perhaps live in rural areas or remote areas in comparison to women that live in the city.
Yeah. It's really interesting. So we've had a few detailed looks at those women, and they use a lot fewer poor grammar, far fewer health services than women in the urban areas. Of course, partly that's due to availability of health services. And we thought that their health would be a lot worse as a consequence, but there's only a few areas, I think heart disease, some cancers, there's only a few areas where their health's worse. They do have greater rates of obesity and overweight and poorer health behaviours in terms of physical activity and healthy eating, which is sort of counterintuitive because you think that people in the bush will have much more healthy lives, but in fact access to food, just incidental activity is less, so it's not what you think it is. But when we had a really good look at those differences in healthcare use and health needs and health trajectories and all of that, basically had to, and drought and salination and all sorts of things. Basically what we had to conclude is that when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And so what those women demonstrate was this remarkable resilience. So that's just comes through loud and clear.
This is just a detail of the study, but you made me think when you said you asked people how many books were in their home. I grew up in suburban Melbourne. There were very few books in the house, but there was a commercial library, and there was a lot of reading done. So did it take account of that?
Well, it's that no, but just to defend the measure a little bit. It's an indicator of not just how much reading you did, but a little bit of the culture in which you grew up. So did you grow up in a home where books were valued and reading were valued? So I grew up in a home with very few books, but you're right, I was in the library all the time. So yeah, so there is a mitigating factor there, but in terms of the culture and the cultural background, you know, my background is one where nobody went to university, people didn't finish primary school.
So did mine.
But we rose above it.
So I was wrapped the entire talk, thank you very much. And I would like to ask about the impact of other crises. So we've just been through a big economic and social crisis, but did you see an impact from, say, the 2008 GFC or anything along those lines?
You know, I saw a really dramatic increase in stress around the 9/11. It's interesting because poor design in our study is that we survey each cohort in a different year. So we never, apart from last year, or 2020, we haven't surveyed all the women at the same time. But even around that, from that to 9/11, saw this really big impact on stress, and it actually lasted for a few years. So we did see it in all of the cohorts. So I think you can see that. And then at a micro level, because we ask about life events, if people have experienced bushfire or robbery or floods, we can look at that sort of thing as well.
Thank you so much, Julie. I really enjoyed your presentation. You did talk about the women in the study according to eras of age groups. Did you also look at